It's over. President Trump is now officially the most acquitted president in U.S. history after the Senate fell short of guilty votes needed to convict the former president of inciting an insurrection. So where do we go from here? Friends, it's time for Hold the Line.
The yeas are 57. The nays are 43. Two-thirds of the senators present not having voted guilty. The Senate judges that the respondent, Donald John Trump, former President of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the article of impeachment.
Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. That was Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy presiding over the second acquittal of former President Trump. Trump's second impeachment trial came to an end on Saturday with the U.S. Senate voting 57 guilty, 43 not guilty of incitement to insurrection. In total, 7 Republicans voted against President Trump, but Senate Democrats still failed to muster the two-thirds majority needed for a conviction. Here's what Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had to say shortly after the vote.
The vast majority of the Senate Republican caucus, including the Republican leader, voted to acquit former President Trump, signing their names in the columns of history alongside his name forever. January 6th will live as a day of infamy in the history of the United States of America. The failure to convict Donald Trump will live as a vote of infamy in the history of the United States Senate.
If you thought Saturday's not guilty vote would bring this whole farce to an end, you'd be wrong. Lawmakers are now calling for the formation of an independent 9/11-style commission to investigate the January 6th riot on Capitol Hill.
This was a remarkable week, a powerful week, and I think the House managers, obviously Congresswoman Dean and Congressman Raskin, and a very talented team put on an incredibly compelling and powerful case. But there's still more evidence that the American people need and deserve to hear, and a 9/11 commission is a way to make sure that we secure the Capitol going forward and that we lay bare the record of just how responsible and how abjectly violating of his constitutional oath President Trump really was.
They just won't let Trump leave. They will not let Trump go. They will not move on to something else, not willingly. They get too much out of this. They hate him too much. They've trained their base that orange man bad is the greatest menace to have ever faced this country, and they want to continue this. We'll get into some of the reasons why. They must continue this circus. But first, there are some ways they can do it, and even Republicans like Mitch McConnell, seem to think that maybe they should give it a shot. Here he is.
Trump is still liable for everything he did while he was in office as an ordinary citizen. Unless the statute of limitations is run, still liable for everything he did while he's in office. Didn't get away with anything yet. We have a criminal justice system in this country. We have civil litigation. And former presidents are not immune from being accountable by either one.
Prosecute him, sue him. That's what Mitch McConnell's saying about the now departed Republican president. That's the advice he's giving to the other side. And I think we should all take it very seriously because Democrats are unhinged when it comes to the now former president. And they want this to continue. And I mention that because they've trained their audience and their voters to believe that Trump is this constant menace, and there are reasons they're doing it. Even out of power, he remains a menace. But Lindsey Graham brought something else up here. Because will they prosecute Trump? They might try. If they did, it would likely be in New York, although they're talking about Georgia now, too, based on yet another phone call, right? They impeached him over a phone call in Ukraine. Now they're going to go after him for the phone call to Raffensperger in Georgia before the senatorial election there. And I got to tell you, they also may bring lawsuits against Trump, although he's got money and that may not be quite as effective as they would like it to be. Lindsey Graham points out that maybe we have to start making Democrats live by the rules that they force upon the other side. Maybe the only way to get them to stop being so crazy is if we can force them to have to deal with the world that they have created in our politics, with the debasement of impeachment to be a standard tool of partisan politics now. That's what has happened. And he's brought up, when we're in the majority, maybe Kamala needs to get impeached. Play it.
The process they used to impeach this president was an affront to rule of law. He's the first president to ever be impeached without a lawyer, without a witness, without an ability to confront those against him. And the trial record was a complete joke, hearsay upon hearsay. And we've opened Pandora's box to future presidents. And if you use this model, I don't know how Kamala Harris doesn't get impeached if the Republicans take over the House, because she actually bailed out rioters, and one of the rioters went back to the streets and broke somebody's head open. So we've opened Pandora's box here, and I'm sad for the country.
Should it be used? Now that the box, so to speak, is wide open, should we actually use this in the arsenal of political tools against the other side? That's a question Republicans are going to have to think through in the weeks and months ahead. But why also such a fixation on continuing this even after Trump has left office? He's no longer the president, no longer holds any position of public trust. He's not in power anymore. Sure, they're concerned about the possibility that he may run at some point in the future. That's in the back of their minds. But they've also got broader plans, as we've seen. Ever since the January 6th riot, the Democrats have been going into overdrive to try to push a narrative of MAGA terrorism, the white supremacist hordes that are ready to march upon Capitol Hill at any point in time again to take over the government, an insurrection in the waiting. This is why they continue to call for National Guard troops to be deployed in large numbers in D.C., and this is going to stretch on for months now. And so they need to keep this going because it allows them to view Republicans and Trump supporters as the other. It creates the excuse, the baseline justification for using federal government power against your political opponents and pretending you're doing so in order to preserve our democracy. That's right, authoritarianism and even totalitarianism in the name of saving our republic. And that's why they want to do things like a Truth Commission. Here's a member of Congress, Democrat of course, talking about exactly that.
Also said in an interview with the 19th News website this week that the country needs a Truth Commission. What exactly would a Truth Commission be?
So I think part of what we're seeing now is because we haven't really done the reckoning with the racial injustice and white supremacy of our past that we need to do. And so, a Truth Commission, a lot of people will think of South Africa. We've used them in countries around the world. And basically what it is it's communities all the way up to the national level having conversations about both the gory and the glory of our history and what happened both throughout the history of our country and leading up to and on January 6th so that we can come to a common narrative moving forward of what we want our country to be.
A Truth Commission. How many months do you think that will go on for? And how many conversations about Donald Trump will they be having on the floor of Congress discussing how he was a white supremacist? That's going to be their Truth Commission, just to sort of keep the whole show going. It'll be like if Rachel Maddow's insane monologues from the Trump era were then just recited by Democrat members of Congress for months and months on end to keep this all going. You know why they're doing this? Sure, they want to control us, they want to attack us, they want to feel justified in using the federal government to do so, but also some Democrats recognize at some level that Joe Biden is a nincompoop and a buffoon, and people are going to recognize very quickly we were sold a bill of goods. That's right. Joe Biden, not the great unifier, certainly not the great governor that we were told he would be. All right, after the break, more on the Senate's acquittal of former President Trump with Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs. Stay there. These days, being prepared for the unknown is more important than ever. What's the stock market going to do next month? What's the economy going to look like in the third quarter? With this Biden administration, with the trillions of dollars of spending, all the regulations, who knows what's going to happen? The world we live in today is anything but predictable. We could all benefit from something reliable right about now. Well, what could be more reliable than real gold and silver? I'm talking about actual gold and silver that you can hold right in your hands. Call the Oxford Gold Group now and learn how easy it is to get real gold and silver sent securely directly to your home, or how you can have real gold and silver placed in your IRA or 401k. Just call the Oxford Gold Group at 833-600-GOLD and ask for your free guide on owning gold and silver. Again, call the Oxford Gold Group right now, 833-600-GOLD. The Oxford Gold Group is the only gold company I trust. It's who I get my gold from. Call them right now at 833-600-GOLD. One more time, that's 833-600-GOLD.
Look, my view from the beginning, I don't think Joe Biden wanted to go down the road of impeachment. I don't think Schumer and most of the Democratic senators wanted to go down the road of impeachment. The reason we're here is the hard left hates Donald Trump, and the House Democrats, they really reflect that hard partisan left. They drove the impeachment. I think Schumer felt he couldn't tell his base no, especially when he's afraid of being primaried from the left in New York. But I think Senate Democrats, they just got committee gavels. They just became chairman. They want to be taking up legislation, moving nominees. I think Senate Democrats are really frustrated right now.
Senator Ted Cruz nails it on this impeachment fiasco. Remember, this is the second time around. The most acquitted man in U.S. political history, at least as president, former President Donald Trump, must be pretty happy with the outcome of this weekend's vote. The Democrats have managed in 4 years to fail at not one, but two politicized impeachments of the former president. Here for more about the trial and also the upcoming COVID relief bill. You know, the kind of stuff Congress should be doing. I'm joined by Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs. Congressman Biggs, always good to see you.
Good to be with you, Buck. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with, what was this all about? What was achieved?
Well, achieved was embarrassment on the part of the Democrats yet again. I mean, Ted Cruz was right. This was a political folly. The Democrats and the left, they hate Donald Trump. They hate the people who support Donald Trump. They were trying to erase Donald Trump. And I believe that the successful part for them was they were trying to distract from some of the crazy left-wing things that they're trying to do in Congress, whether it's President Biden and some of his executive orders he's issuing, or whether it's the legislation that the Democrats are putting forward that are going to really change who we are as Americans. This really served as a distraction. So for that, they get an A+ on that effort. But the reality is they had no way forward with this thing. This thing, they lost on the facts, they lost on the process, and they lost on the Constitution itself. It was an embarrassment for them.
Do you think there were any surprises in the 7 Republicans in the Senate who voted for conviction? Were you surprised by any of them?
A little bit, I would say mildly surprised by Burr and Cassidy, just a bit. I think Cassidy telegraphed that a little bit, but I wouldn't have thought that those guys would go so blatantly against their constituency.
One of my concerns, Congressman, is that this is all part of a narrative the Democrats are building to justify a lot of what I would view as really unconstitutional and reprehensible actions for the Biden administration going forward, specifically around the issue of Trump terrorism, MAGA terrorists, surveillance. We have the deployment of troops still in D.C. I'm hearing today that could be extended for months, even beyond where it currently is. Are you expecting and are you hearing that there may be legislative action taken at some point by Democrats? They may try to advance something in the House to crack down on what they view as this continued insurrection threat.
Yeah, I do, Buck. That's a great point. I think one of the things that I'm hearing that's going around the rumor mill is that they want to basically have a second Patriot Act. They want to expand the use of FISA. They want to categorize people who disagree with them politically and philosophically as domestic terrorists. You see that everywhere you go. You hear the term white supremacists for Republicans. They don't just call us Republicans anymore. We're white supremacists. And they want to really couch it in those types of inflammatory language because they want to use that to justify spying on people who they disagree with. The problem for them is that's 75 million who voted for President Trump, and then there's probably tens of millions of other people who they disagree with as well. So yes, it is something to be really concerned with, and we're hearing that. That is a live one on the rumor mill right now.
I wanted to have you react to this. I wanted to add this into our conversation. Here was one of President Trump's lawyers talking about the media's role in this whole fiasco. Play it.
Somebody should look at the conduct of these House managers. It's unconscionable. aside from all of the due process violations that my client had. And the media should be looking at a square, straight way. The straight way. Your coverage is so slanted, it's got to stop. You guys have to stop and start reporting more like PBS does rather than a TV news show that doesn't have any journalistic integrity at all.
I think his view of PBS might be actually a little too favorable, but I'll just say he's right about the media being all in as cheerleaders for a conviction here. What do you make of it?
I agree with him 100%, except for that PBS comment as well, Buck. I mean, the reality is the media was all in, and when the House managers violated, by the way, they violated the new rule that they passed trying to get after conservatives just a few weeks ago. They violated that when they doctored up the montage of videos that they consistently ran. They doctored it up when they basically took things out of context, didn't play the whole quote, etc. He's right. The media facilitated that. With impunity, the House managers knew that they would never be questioned seriously about that. And so two things about it. I think that there's some issues that House managers may run into in the future based on what they did in that impeachment hearing and trial in the Senate. And the media itself has culpability in it because they're helping to further this narrative and distort the truth. And if that's going to be the case, then I don't know that we ever bring people back together. I don't know if we ever bring people back.
I want to switch gears for a second because there's still a lot that Congress needs to do. Most notably right now, get that COVID relief bill passed, money that should have been in people's pockets a long time ago. Can you just tell us what has the delay been up to this point, and when do you think this is actually going to get done? Why hasn't it gotten done?
Well, it hasn't gotten done because the Democrats don't want to just do COVID relief. They don't want to just simply do PPP or that type of direct action programs. They want to basically expand and spend trillions of dollars. When we already have, by the way, Buck, we already have over $1 trillion left that was already appropriated that just hasn't been allocated yet. They could have done that immediately, but they chose not to. So what they're doing is they're having to use a procedure. I won't get into the weeds on it, but they're having to use a congressional procedure that is a little bit longer and drawn out because it allows them to get 51 votes on it in the Senate instead of the 60 votes. They can't get the 60 votes because it's such a bad bill, bad package that they put together. So because it goes far beyond COVID relief. So it's going to be that type of deal. So it's going to come out of the House. We actually had hearings on it last week. Most of the committees have had hearings. It can come out of the House pretty soon, get over to the Senate, and they want to do it that way. So we're talking several weeks out still. But the bottom line, Buck, is they're doing a procedural, basically a thingamajig, a procedural thingamajig, so that the public won't have to see what's going on. They're basically saying we're going to do this so the Senate doesn't have to go by its 60 votes. It's going to only need 51 votes.
So it may be springtime before people actually get any of the aid that the federal government has been withholding now for many months.
Yes, I think that's probably right, Buck.
Congressman, always appreciate you, sir. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Buck.
For 2 years, the Lincoln Project was celebrated in the media as the Republican resistance to President Donald Trump. But it looks like the music is about to stop for these former GOP consultants. We'll take a closer look in the group's shady founders in tonight's Buck Brief. You never thought COVID-19 could cost you your home, right? Well, it actually can, because cybercrime is up 75%. And by far the most serious cybercrime when it comes to your home is home title theft. That's right, cyber criminals, foreign and domestic, are now after our homes, and it's easier than you'd think. The title documents to our homes are online now. The thief finds your home's title and forges your signature on a quitclaim deed stating you sold your home to him. Then he takes out loans on your home and leaves you in debt. You won't know until late payment or eviction notices arrive, and insurance doesn't cover you, and neither do common identity theft programs. That's why I protect my home with Home Title Lock. The instant Home Title Lock detects someone tampering with my home's title, they help shut it down. Go to HometitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim, then use code RADIO to receive 30 free days of protection. That's code radio at HomeTitleLock.com. Again, code radio at HomeTitleLock.com. The Lincoln Project, a super PAC founded in 2019, has billed itself as the premier home for the Republican resistance to Donald Trump. On its website, the group has stated two goals: to defeat Trump at the ballot box and to ensure Trumpism fails alongside him. You've no doubt seen its co-founders making the rounds on CNN, MSNBC, and other left-wing news outlets where they're treated like celebrities, truth tellers among Republicans. The group has reportedly raised over $90 million over the course of its existence. But a few weeks into Joe Biden's term, and it's starting to look like the party is over for the Lincoln Project. In the past few weeks, the group has all but fallen apart under the weight of several high-profile scandals involving some of their founding members. So just who are they? Let's take a deep dive into the hive of scum and villainy known as the Lincoln Project in tonight's Buck Brief. There's a lot to get to here, so let's take a look at the Lincoln Project dossier, one jerk at a time. We'll start with arguably the group's most prominent member, co-founder Steve Schmidt. Schmidt resigned from the organization's board last week after evidence emerged that he had ignored the predatory behavior of another co-founder, John Weaver. Oh, we'll get to Weaver a little bit later. Steve Schmidt is a political consultant who's worked on a number of high-profile Republican campaigns, including California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and President George W. Bush. Most notably, though, Schmidt was the senior campaign strategist and advisor to Senator John McCain during his 2008 presidential run. It was reportedly Schmidt who pushed McCain to choose Alaska Governor Sarah Palin as his running mate. Not long after McCain's defeat in the general election, Schmidt stabbed the senator in the back. In interviews conducted for a book called Game Change, Schmidt was highly critical of McCain's choice of Palin, despite the fact that it was, at least in part, his idea. The relationship between McCain and his former strategist grew so acrimonious that the late senator gave specific instructions that Schmidt not be invited to his funeral. A report in The Hill shortly after McCain's 2018 passing read, quote, "The senator's former presidential campaign manager, Steve Schmidt, and senior advisor, Nicole Wallace, were not invited to the late Republican senator's funeral services. McCain's longtime strategist, John Weaver, also wasn't invited, per a report that cited 3 sources who spoke off the record." Well, last week, John McCain's daughter, Meghan McCain, reiterated this point, tweeting that since 2008, quote, "No McCain would have spit on Schmidt or Weaver if they were on fire." Ah, that brings us to the aforementioned John Weaver. Weaver got his start as a regular in Texas politics, working on a number of congressional and gubernatorial campaigns. He rose to national prominence when he was instrumental in both of George H.W. Bush's presidential campaigns. He was also an early advisor to John McCain's presidential campaign alongside Steve Schmidt. Most recently, Weaver was the chief strategist for Ohio Governor John Kasich's 2016 presidential primary campaign. Over the past several weeks, reports began surfacing, and notably from our friend Ryan Gerdusky, that Weaver would frequently solicit and harass young men, including teenage boys, dangling jobs in front of them in return for sexual favors. As of today, nearly 24 young men have accused Weaver of this type of behavior. Here's fellow Lincoln Project co-founder George Conway's response when he was first asked about the allegations.
It's terrible and awful and appalling and unfathomable. I didn't know John very well. I frankly only spoke to him a couple of times on the phone early on in the Lincoln Project. It's almost, I don't even know what to say. It's just terrible. And it leaves me speechless, frankly.
John Weaver, who's that? Never heard of him. Sure. Despite the feigned shock and outrage, John Weaver's habit of soliciting young men has been described as an open secret in Washington, D.C. circles for quite some time. As a matter of fact, Republican strategist and former chief of staff to George W. Bush, Karl Rove, had been ringing the alarm bells on Weaver since the 1980s, back when both were rising stars in the Republican Party of Texas. Of course, Weaver's interest in the Lincoln Project was about more than cruising for young men. It was also financial. According to the IRS, Weaver has an outstanding federal tax lien against his home in Austin, Texas, of over $300,000. Ironic, considering the Lincoln Project has called President Trump a tax fraud for years. Finally, there's Rick Wilson. This guy is particularly odious. He is a political consultant who made his name in Florida politics. In 2016, he was a strategist for the independent Evan McMullin campaign. That right there should tell you a lot about this guy. In 2012, he posted a photo to his Instagram account featuring a cooler with a Confederate flag and the words, "The South shall rise again," an image which reemerged in 2020. Normally, that would be enough to earn the never-ending scorn of the left. That's something that might get you canceled. But the controversy seemed to die down fairly quickly in Wilson's case. He was useful, you see, to Democrats. The media was willing to tolerate this rebel flag-waving neo-Confederate guy as long as he was bad-mouthing Trump. As a matter of fact, here's Wilson with CNN's Don Lemon in January of last year, showing just how much contempt he has for Trump voters.
Donald Trump couldn't find Ukraine on a map if you had the letter U and a picture of an actual physical crane next to it. He knows that this is, an administration defined by ignorance of the world. And so that's partly him playing to their base and playing to their audience, the credulous boomer Rube demo that backs Donald Trump, that wants to think that Donald Trump's a smart one and y'all elitists are dumb.
Who would have thought that guy was a jerk, huh? Yeah. Wilson has a history of running off with people's money. Back in 2017, he launched a crowdfunding campaign to produce an anti-Trump movie called Everything Trump Touches Dies. Potential backers were promised that the film would be released by January of 2018. Wilson managed to raise close to $65,000 from 1,400 donors. 4 years later, no movie has ever been delivered. The last time Wilson updated his backers was more than 2 years ago when he assured them the movie was still going to be made. I don't think his backers should be expecting a refund anytime soon, though. Like the other co-founders, the Lincoln Project was a boon for Rick Wilson, who was in very rough financial shape before co-founding the group. According to IRS documents obtained by the New York Post, Wilson had an outstanding federal tax lien against his home in Tallahassee, Florida, of nearly $400,000. His bank had moved to foreclose on the property in 2016. I mean, do any of these guys pay their taxes? Is that just a part of this, or? Wilson was also taken to court over an unpaid balance of close to $26,000 on his American Express card. Again, everyone knew who these guys were before the election, a group of grifters and leeches. The Lincoln Project was never about real republicanism or conservatism or saving the party or any of that stuff. It was never really even about beating Donald Trump, although I know they did hate him. According to a report from liberal outlet Vox, the biggest chunk of the project's ad spending as of August of last year, about $2 million, was in Washington, D.C. They also spent close to $200,000 in New York City, where Trump received just 18% of the vote in 2016. Ask yourself this question. If this had really been about defeating Trump, why would you be spending money on ads in places where Trump was already certain to lose? You wouldn't, right? But their goal wasn't more votes, it was more money. The real target of their ads were the donor class and the media elite, people who write big checks and put them on the airwaves. It was all completely self-serving. For the Lincoln Project, self-serving was always the name of the game. Of the $90 million the group raised, more than $50 million has reportedly gone to firms controlled by the group's leaders. According to the Associated Press, there's also tens of millions of dollars that are unaccounted for that likely went toward exorbitant consulting fees collected by the group's members. So ultimately, what does all this mean? Ultimately, what does it mean for us? It's just the latest reminder that the left was willing to crawl into bed with anyone, as long as they were willing to attack Trump. For all intents and purposes, the Lincoln Project is likely finished as a viable political operation. As of today, the group's donation page has gone inactive. Its radioactive co-founders are now crawling back underneath the rocks from which they came, hopefully permanently. But we'll see. Coming up, fallout continues from the stunning admission that New York Governor Andrew Cuomo actively covered up the nursing home fatality catastrophe in his state. After the break, New York Post columnist Karol Markowicz will discuss the latest. Pressure is mounting on New York Governor Andrew Cuomo as the nursing home cover-up continues to get worse. Last week, Cuomo's top aide told Democratic leaders, privately, the Cuomo administration purposefully withheld COVID-19 death toll numbers in nursing homes out of fear of the Trump administration finding out the real numbers. Now, more members of Cuomo's own party are calling him out. New York Democratic Congressman Antonio Delgado tweeting last night, "Politics should never come before people's lives. The secretary to the governor's remarks are beyond troubling and warrant a full investigation. Thousands of New Yorkers lost family and nursing homes to COVID-19, a pain made worse by the inability to comfort their loved ones in their final hours. They deserve answers and accountability." So what's next for the Emmy Award-winning governor? That's right, he got an Emmy this last year. Here to discuss, New York Post columnist Karol Markowicz. Karol, it feels like this is justice delayed and perhaps might still be denied, but at least we're starting to see the beginning of accountability for Cuomo.
Yeah, I still don't have high hopes that anything comes of it. It's still a massive cover-up that's being ignored by largely the media. Even though they are mentioning it more often now in their segments, nobody's really holding him accountable. And it's going to continue that way, I think, because he's on the team. He's on their team, and they're going to defend him.
NBC, CBS, and ABC, to your point, as of yesterday, all had zero coverage on their news shows about the Cuomo cover-up, which is truly stunning. But so you don't believe, I mean, there's talk about how, well, Newsom is facing a recall. It's kind of fascinating when you think about it. Newsom is facing this recall. They now have enough signatures, the state of California. I know there's no recall mechanism in the New York State Constitution, but it seems like Cuomo he's got the biggest problem of anybody, but because he created this facade of the anti-Trump governor who's buddy-buddy with Fauci, it's like it doesn't count. I mean, I was watching today, and when he was giving his press conference, there was a live stream beneath him. Fortunately, Karol, there were plenty of New Yorkers, it seemed, who were trolling the you-know-what out of him, which was great. But there were a lot of other people. In Cuomo, we trust. Thank you for saving us during this pandemic. What's it going to take for these people to wake up?
Right, and the term I'll never be able to unhear, Cuomo-sexual, somebody being a Cuomo-sexual, meaning they were in love with the governor. It's really bad. I could see him being reelected. I'm so down on New York right now and New Yorkers basically because they fell for this guy's shtick. And it's depressing to me that his administration admits to lying about the numbers because they were afraid of what Trump might tweet. And yet New Yorkers aren't, rising up en masse to get rid of him.
I do think that people are going to start paying a lot more attention to who the governor is in a state. We've gotten also focused on maybe, our mayor if we're in a city and then the federal government. But the state government, as we've all seen during COVID, you can either have a DeSantis or you can have a Cuomo, and it makes a big difference to how your life actually goes. I wanted to let you react. This is what Cuomo said today during the press conference.
This past year, there is a toxic political environment, and everything gets politicized. And there's political spin, and then there are facts. COVID did not get into the nursing homes by people coming from hospitals. COVID got into the nursing homes by staff walking into the nursing home.
There's absolutely no way that he knows that. Can I just put that out there? There's zero way. I don't care what studies they try to show. There's no way to convince people that it only came through staff. But go ahead, Karol. I mean, this is just the latest in a long series of BS lies from this guy.
Yeah. And he spent the summer when New York's numbers were pretty low saying, we defeated COVID. He wrote a book, he made a poster, and he spent the summer degrading other states who didn't follow the really strict lockdown that New York did and saying that those states, had played politics with COVID and they lost. Well, the truth is those states ended up having better outcomes than New York. So there are facts, and Governor Cuomo generally chooses to ignore those facts.
We also have CDC Director Walensky, switching to the federal level for a second here, and Dr. Fauci. You've been right on the forefront with how school lockdowns are unscience or not based in science, unscientific in the approach. It's all politics. Here's what the top health officials are saying right now. Play it.
The American Rescue Plan has resources, $130 billion of resources to facilitate and help schools get there. And that's really why we're pushing for the rescue plans.
I think that the schools really do need more resources, and that's the reason why the National Relief Act that we're talking about getting passed, we need that. The schools need more resources.
This is the ransom demand, right? They've taken the children hostage. That's what the Democrat Party teachers unions have done. And they will not release them, as in this case, let them go into school until the demands are met for the hostages, which means $120 billion for schools. I mean, that's a big number even for our federal budget.
Yeah, it sounds like real money. It's amazing that not even a month into the Biden administration, and the administration has completely destroyed the credibility of Dr. Fauci and Walensky. Walensky can never go on TV again without being asked, is this in your personal capacity or not? Because she said that schools can reopen even before teachers are vaccinated. And the Biden administration pushed back and said, oh, she was speaking in her personal capacity. So from here on out, every time she speaks, we have to be like, is this in your personal capacity or is this as part of the CDC? They've completely politicized everything. You have Fauci and Walensky going on TV and talking about the budget. It's mind-boggling. I mean, this is stuff that the Trump administration would have been just slaughtered for, and they're getting, as usual, pretty much a pass. CNN is at least a little bit pushing back on it, but in general, they're getting a pass largely.
Well, I think they're starting to have to push back in a little because it's so obvious that even the most brainwashed idiot MSNBC watcher can kind of start to figure out if private schools have been open all year, parochial schools have been open all year, in all these blue states, if Florida can have schools open and everything's okay, why have schools ever been closed in states like New York, states like public schools we're talking about now? And what is $120 billion? They're talking about new ventilation systems for the schools, and this is like Green New Deal, let's rebuild every building in America level crazy and get rid of all the cow farts. Chicago Mayor Lightfoot, by the way, has also reached the point where she's like, guys, I can't cover for you anymore. Here she is saying it should be disturbing when teachers say, I don't care what you say, I don't care what you do, I'm not going to abide by the contract or the rules that have been set for my place of employment. That's chaos, ultimately. They'd like to take over not only the Chicago public schools, but take over running the city government. I mean, just so everybody understands, in Chicago, the teachers' unions are basically like, nah, make me. Illegal strike. What are you going to do about it? Your kids be damned, by the way. Your kids be damned.
Absolutely. And, if anybody had Mayor Lightfoot pushing back on unions, they, step forward and collect your gazillion dollars, because that's something nobody ever saw coming. But yeah, she's saying that they want to form their own political movement and their own city government. And she's absolutely right. They have gotten a taste of power and they like it. And they have had all this control throughout all this time, and they're not looking to let it go. Back for a second to the news media finally starting to talk about this a little bit. Those news anchors and the people that work for them have kids in school. They're also tired of it. They've sort of reached the breaking point. You could see it in some of the anchors' faces where they're like clearly have kids at home which they need to go to school right now.
It's amazing as this continues to play out. I mean, people are really finally, I think, starting to see how wrong-headed so much of this has been. And you've been one of the ones raising the alarm, Karol, so we appreciate it. At the New York Post, Karol Markowicz, everybody. Karol, thanks so much.
Thank you.
After the break, we got our rapid-fire look at stories that still need to get some attention from yours truly. Quick hits up next. Nancy Pelosi has a meltdown after this weekend's Senate vote, and Vice President Kamala Harris flat out lies about vaccine distribution. Let's get to these quick hits, and we shall start with the Pelosi meltdown.
Oh, these cowardly senators who couldn't face up to what the president did and what was at stake for our country are now going to have a chance to give a little slap on the wrist. We censure people for using stationery for the wrong purpose. We don't censure people for inciting insurrection that kills people in the Capitol.
Pelosi looks like she's upset. Oh no, poor sad Nancy. Oh. Yeah, Nancy, maybe you guys shouldn't have tried to impeach the president on a farce a year ago. Maybe that hurt your credibility. Maybe rushing that through. Oh, that's right, when the COVID pandemic was starting, didn't really build a lot of trust in the good faith that you'd be using here for yet another impeachment process. And maybe saying the president incited an insurrection when he clearly did not actually incite it. And calling it an insurrection when it's a riot and had no real plan nor any real effort to overthrow the government. Maybe those were all problems too. Oh, and the manufacturing of evidence. There was a lot of stuff there. But Nancy's very upset. Did she really believe? I mean, she really thought? No, of course not. It's all theatrics. I mean, Nancy's the biggest fraud in the world. Chardonnay Nancy, everybody. The socialist that Marin County, California deserves. All right. Now we have Harris on the vaccines. Let's hear what the vice president has to say.
You're coming up on a month in. You're inside the machine. What are you finding is harder about the pandemic? Like, how are you finding the hole is deeper?
I mean, the challenge, Mike, is, you know, what I explained to the mayors. There was no stockpile, right? It's, in many ways...
No stockpile
of vaccines, right? So we're looking at this. There was no national strategy or plan for vaccinations. We were leaving it to the states and local leaders to try and figure it out. And so in many ways, we're starting from scratch on something that's been raging for almost an entire year.
Starting from scratch. She comes in, Biden comes in, they have a vaccine, which is going to save a whole lot of lives, already is. It's a miracle the vaccine was done so quickly. Thank you, Operation Warp Speed. They already were at 750, 800,000 vaccinations a day before Biden even goes into office. And they're starting from scratch, she says. I mean, look, I know they have to lower the bar because old man Biden is a joke and we're going to keep seeing more and more of that. So they got to at least try to create this perception that, you know, what he does is not that awful because it's not that bad, but it really is. This is just too much, though. They're just lying to your face about this. They're lying in a way that's obvious. And now we're seeing, you know, the Democrats are in charge. Do you feel like the whole COVID response is so much better now? Oh, they're always wearing the mask in all of the different interviews. That's really going to save a lot of lives, isn't it? Sure. Joe Biden's already been vaccinated, always wearing a mask. Oh, it's about the leadership of showing people how much you mask up. Sure it is. That's science. Perception. Sure it is. Speaking of science, question mark, or quotation marks, not question marks. Fauci on the Biden administration starting from scratch. Here's what he said a couple weeks ago.
Ask you about the effort to distribute the vaccines, because of course that's what makes people want to know, when are they going to get a vaccine? Is the Biden administration starting from scratch with the vaccine distribution effort, or are you picking up where the Trump administration left off?
No, I mean, we certainly are not starting from scratch because there is activity going on in the distribution.
So we're not starting from scratch. So when someone who's in a position to know something for sure, like Kamala Harris, says a thing that is clearly untrue, media, there's a word for that. I think it's a lie. I think she's lying to you, but people will repeat it, they will hear it, they will think it, and that's ultimately the purpose here. They'll tell you things that you know are not true, and you will be expected to accept this for whatever reason. Do Democrats care about the Constitution? I know she's technically a Republican, but she's not really a Republican. Do Democrats care about the Constitution? Here's former Republican strategist Nicole Wallace. We talked about her before. Nicole Wallace refers to it as a shtick.
And you had in the day before the trial, far-right conservative lawyer Chuck Cooper come out in the pages of the Wall Street Journal debunking the constitutional claim. I thought this was some of the most airtight evidence. They literally put the Constitution up, which is a Republican shtick. That's what Republicans do. The Democrats had the letter of the law on their side. They had the constitutional claim. They had plenty of conservative lawyers, but that seems to be what they're hiding behind.
It's a shtick, the Constitution. You know, that's how they view it. I know sometimes the truth comes out by accident. That's it for Hold the Line tonight. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.